o'clock. Let us start with today's webinar. Welcome, everyone. The topic of today's session is on current activities in developing actuaries. My name is Henning Wergen. I am chairperson of the AAE Education Committee, and I'm very happy that I have two fellow members of the Education Committee presenting two current topics. I think especially in these special times, a special focus is put on education and qualification of professionals. So I'm very happy that all of you have joined today's session. I'm quite sure a couple of more will dial in the next seconds or minutes. As you have seen from the program, we have two topics today. First of all, we will talk on the importance of ethical aspects of actuarial education, and I'm very happy that we have Colm Fitzgerald, who's Assistant Professor of Actuarial Science in the University College Dublin, who will give the first session, and the second session will be held by Rafael Moreno Ruiz, who's a professor at the University of Malaga, and he will talk on the CPD strategy of the AAE, and will give some insights to that. We are very happy to receive your questions. We reserved the last half hour of the webinar for questions and answers. So please use the chat function to write down your questions. I will collect them so that we can concentrate on the end in answering your questions if something is open or needs to be discussed. So that will be the procedure for today, and I'm very happy to directly hand over to Colm, who will talk on the importance of ethical aspects of the actuarial education. And so, Colm, the virtual floor is yours.
Cheers, Henning. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well. I'd like to thank Henning, Raphael, Monique, and Suzanne for organising the webinar and for the invitation to talk to you this morning. Actuaries, in my opinion, take ethics more seriously than most, and it's good to see actuaries tuning in this morning on a Monday morning at the start of half year end, which I know for many of you is a time where you have a lot of work to do. What I'm going to do is to talk to you about instruction on character formation in the ethical education of actuaries. This is an approach that I use in UCD to teach ethics to the actuarial students. It's a very old approach, but we're using kind of a modern approach to deliver it to the students. The views I'm going to express in the webinar are my own rather than of any of the organizations of which I'm related to. The aim of the webinar is to encourage greater debate on the topic of ethics education in our profession. And that's the reason why we're here today, because it's one of the items on the agenda of the Education Committee. So, to give you an overview of the talk, I'm going to briefly talk to you about the role played by ethics in our profession. I'm going to talk to you about the ethics education in our profession, how that stands at the moment. And then for the majority of the webinar, I'm going to talk to you about how we might strengthen our ethics education, and more specifically about instruction on character formation and why we might want to include this and what opportunities it can present to us. And then at the end, I'll give a very quick summary and conclusions. So, the role of ethics in our profession. I guess the best way to look at it is to look at what things were like in the past, and to take the perspective of the public interest, I guess you could say. So if we put ourselves in the position of Joe Bloggs on the street, they want to buy some insurance. What they are wary of is that the insurance company might go bust and won't be able to pay out their claims or their pension when they retire. And I guess it was the wisdom of the founders of the actuarial profession when they realized that if you have a company structure as normal, it is more likely to go bust than if you have a company structure where you have an actuary involved. And the idea of an actuary is someone who is strong in a maths way, but they also have a duty to put the public interest first. And that's a quote from the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries Royal Charter. So I guess you could say, if you step back, the main role played by actuaries is in creating and maintaining trust. I've created, excuse me, a short video on that if you'd like to have a look. One of the reasons why I mentioned this, though, is that there's been a recent call to remove the public interest from the Code of Conduct of the Actuarial Society of South Africa. You can see the webinar by Simon Louv, who was making the call. I've reached out to Simon a couple of weeks back, and we've been having a good chat about this. And even though on the surface we have the opposite view, behind it all we have a very similar view. He sees effectively what I see, in that there's a lacking in the ethics education. He would say that means we cannot serve the public interest. My view would be more positive, that we can adjust our ethics education so that we can serve the public interest in a more adequate way. I guess my perspective compared to his, I would see the importance of the concept of character as being essential. And also, excuse me, and also that the main reason why actuaries exist is to create some degree of trust in the mind of people who want to buy insurance and pensions. In terms of our current ethics education in the profession, we actually have quite a robust education syllabus. There's a lot of work has gone into it. So even though I'm saying we can improve things a lot, I actually don't think we need to change the core syllabus much, if at all. The word ethics is mentioned twice, but it's also indirectly referred to in several ways. A lot of work has gone into the wording of this, so it actually holds up well. In an indirect way, we have to be able to explain what is the distinguishing features of a profession, which is that ethics are important. We also have to understand ethics in an actuary's work. And in section 9.4, there's also talk about applying professional standards and equity and ethics appropriately to a situation outlined in a case study. Overall, though, it's worth seeing a larger viewpoint, which is the ethics framework in our profession. So we have professionalism and ethics education. We have codes of professional conduct in our various actuarial associations. We have various forms of procedures to deal with actuaries if they're not behaving the way they're supposed to be behaving. We also have external regulations which effectively support us in what we do. And we have individual actions and actions by groups of actuaries to also support that. From my own perspective as well, I'd also say that the example of other actuaries here is a really important thing. I know if I look back at my own ethics education, the influence of my first few bosses was really important. One of them, my first boss, he used to always be saying, it's important that you have the courage to be able to challenge. One of his mantras was, tell me why I'm wrong. So it was really important that actuaries would speak up and try to do the right thing. So for the majority of the webinar, what I'm going to talk to you is about what we can do to strengthen our ethics education. Again, it's my opinion, and I think if we are to try to do something here, the most important thing is that we get many opinions. What I'm aiming to talk to you about is instruction on character formation, which is what we are doing in UCD. That term is probably the best term I could find for a modern description of what used to be referred to as education. Education in its original meaning meant to draw out from within our best self. The aim of it was to know yourself. That might sound very philosophical, or it might sound kind of like aloof academic material. However, it's really important for a fairly obvious reason. We see the world partly the way we are and partly the way the world is. So to see the world the way it is, we need to know ourselves. And the key to getting the best out of ourselves is to knowing ourselves well. I thought it might be useful to explain this concept using maths, as probably like me, you're quite mathematically minded. So in old-fashioned education, it wasn't a brain-centric approach that we normally have now. The idea was we have a psyche, and it was made up of our heart and nous, our head, logos, and our guts, our inner fire. The best way to think about this is if we kind of think about when we did maths for the first time, we would have had a set, and on that set we carried out a function, and we did lots of maths in a set. When it comes to the real world, though, it's the set that is most important and determines the power of what we do. And obviously the amount of passion and energy that we have when we apply that maths is important as well. So we see the world mostly the way we are rather than the way the world is. And Aristotle famously said that educating the head without educating the heart is no education at all. And one way to look at this is using the idea of maths. So if we are in a very natural state, you could say we're in the natural numbers, we're very relaxed, everything's very positive, it's nice and calm. However, we can move out of that set into the integers where there's a bit of negative stuff happening, and that kind of enlarges things a little bit. We can do a little bit more, it's not as comfortable. Then what we can do is we can move out of the set of integers into the rational numbers, where we do a bit of rationalization, so a little bit more uncomfortable, but we can do an awful lot more. Then what we can do is we can move outside of the rational, we can embrace some of the irrational, and we can come into the real world. And we're in the real world in our minds, we can do an awful lot more. And then I think, as Antoine de Saint-Exupéry said, some of the most important things in life are things we cannot see. So if we also open up to the imaginary numbers as well, and then we bring them to into one, we come up with the complex numbers. So we come into the complex world that is out there. So the main thing that's happening here isn't so much the maths we're using, it's the set that we're operating within. So the essence of instruction on character formation is that in the heart of every human being, there is different configurations of the human heart. So the lowest form is that of the brute, where there's not much humanity, there's no responsibility really, there's a very base view of the world, very brutal, very pretentious, full of nonsense. There's probably a view that the world is bad, so I'm going to be bad too, and I'm going to try and pull down the world to my own level, and that kind of stuff. So if you kind of think that Donald Trump is probably a pretty good example there. The next configuration of the human heart would be someone who is a conformist. So they would be quite scared, they find life quite hard, and they have got, though, the humanity to respect norms, respect traditions, and what they do is they aim to try to seek some safety by being part of the herd. And they don't like responsibility too much. They are kind of a bit scared about expressing opinions. They don't like making the decision on something. And often they seek safety with a larger personality who often happens to be a brute, and that can cause issues for them. The next configuration of the heart would be an egoist. So this is someone who does respect norms and traditions, but they're not. It's not everything. They're willing to kind of also see beyond that. They're willing to be responsible. They're willing to kind of work hard. They're willing to have kind of a prudent response to what's happening. And what they're aiming to do is to look after themselves well. And their view is often that, hey, I'm doing my job, you do your job too, and everything will be fine, which doesn't kind of work out as well in practice as they might expect. And then you have the configuration of the human heart, which is what education was aiming to achieve, which is to create a citizen. So this is someone who is like an egoist, but they're also socially responsible. They're willing to act beyond their own self-interest for the greater good. And they're willing to do that for one very simple reason, in that they know that that is the way they will have the happiest life that they can have. So as part of the course in UCD, the students obviously have to learn a little bit about this, but the most important thing is that they feel it and they do some kind of introspection work, and also that they can then show that they understand it. So what I'm going to show you next is a video created by my students, which show the 4 characters in action. So I'm going to switch over to the video, 1 second. So in this video, it's called Inside Me. It's a look at some of the ethical issues that have existed recently regarding brain injuries in the NFL. Some of you might have seen the actuarial relationship with that in the newspapers last year. So they say it's a reflection of the 4 characters within us all. I was chatting with Suzanne before the webinar to ask her opinion. So some of the students are from various parts of Ireland, and their accents may be harder to understand for some of you. So I thought I'd explain a little bit what will happen to hopefully make it a little bit easier. So Owen is the main guy. He's basically working for a consultancy, and he's been told that, you know, if you can say the NFL has isn't in the wrong regarding brain injuries, we will pay you more money and look after you fairly well. And so what happens then is he ends up having a conversation with the other three characters inside himself. So of these characters, the brute guy, he's on your right hand side. He's going to talk a lot of nonsense and he's going to annoy you a lot. On the left hand side will be Rebecca. She's probably one of the strongest students on the course, even though she's only in second year, and she's very much out of character in the role of the conformist. And in the middle, there's an egoist who mostly wants to make money, and he's wearing a gold chain. So I'm going to play the video so you get an idea of what the students would do on this course.
So a strange thing happened the other day. I'm currently acting for the National Football League. I don't know if you're aware, but there was a massive concussion crisis facing the league, which is leading to serious injuries and even deaths to the players. Actuaries will sue the league, claiming to be liable for the injuries caused. The NFL can deny these allegations, and analysts naturally have been employed with the director to prove their theory with a nudge and a wink, with the implications of getting a better job, bigger pension, more salary, all this. I've done some early investigations already, and it's become clear to me that I'm having a devastating impact on the health and well-being of the players. But I didn't know what to do, given all the pressure that was on me from my managers and all these promises, and that's what happened. So I was on a walk where I tried to best scatter my thoughts when I had this strange vision.
Whoa! Sit down, shut up. We know what's right for you. We are what's within you. Oh no, it's only once. It won't happen again. I swear. No, not your conscience, you idiot. Saved it and out for the pearly gates. And what are you?
Don't worry, we don't want any of that.
We're your character. We're what make up and define what you are as an individual.
Okay, sounds cool. So you can help me with my phone?
That's what we're here for.
Well, that's great. I was really struggling.
First of all, get rid of this. You won't be needing that. Just think about this. What have the players ever done for you? They get paid millions to throw a ball around a field. Meanwhile, you passed the hardship of all the actuarial exams. They did nothing. I mean, look, we all know they're on steroids. That's the cause of this problem, okay? While you were waiting for CP1 reading to load on your laptop, they were on their yachts in the Caribbean. Why do you even have to think about this?
I'd be a bit less blunt than that, but look at it this way. Do what's best for you. All that talk of bonuses, bigger pension, promotions, that all sounds good to me. What have the players ever done for you? Don't worry about the players, it's all about you. What benefit does it serve you doing the right thing here? But isn't it a bit shallow waffling on something like that? Shouldn't I be the one to make a stand here? Have a chance to do what is right. Look, if you want to get to the top of the ladder, you're going to have to think about yourself. Do you think Kylie Jenner didn't step on a few toes on the way to making her billions? What the fuck did you need that?
Jesus Christ. Never mind about Kim Kardashian.
What about you over there? Did I understand all this?
No, I don't know. Sure.
Here we go again. She does this all the time. Come on, speak up.
I don't know what you should do. What's everybody else in your office doing? Maybe you should do what they're doing. The last thing you want to do is rock the boat.
That doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
I'm not sure.
What about the players? What have they ever done for you? Why should we care about it? It's not fair. Life's not fair. Make life fair again.
Yes, make life fair again. That sounds right.
So wait, now you're just doing what he tells you, is it?
She does this all the time.
I mean, he is very convincing.
Let's stay on track here. Think about yourself. Think of the dollar bills, the status. It's all going to be yours. In a few years, will you look back and regret? No.
you'll be looking over New York City or penthouse suite, lying on your Gucci bed sheets, with the smell of a full aroma rising up from your lap. That is so wrong. Make life fair. Make money, money, fair. Money, money. Think about the money. Life fair.
It was exhausting. That made me realize you had to lecture in front of me full time. Justice Winnow experience. Justice Socrates said, "I do what is great benefit to society, not what is best benefit to me. I'll walk out the weak, shallow narratives and be willing to rock the boat. It may not work out the best for me, but I've done the right thing." I just want my colleagues to the same realization.
Okay. So I'd say well done to the students there. If I think back what I was like at their age, to ask a question in class was very hard, to present was very hard. So one of the indirect aims of the course is to improve their skills in that way, to give them more self-belief. But the main thing that the course is trying to achieve is introspection. And rather than going on about that for a while, I thought I would use the words of Walter Lippmann. He said, "We forge gradually our greatest instrument for understanding the world, introspection. We discovered that humanity may resemble us very considerably, that the best way of knowing the inwardness of our neighbours is to know ourselves. For after all, the only real experience we really understand is our own, and that in the least of us is so rich that no one has yet exhausted its possibilities. It has been said that every genuine character an artist produces in one of the characters is one of the characters he might have been. By recreating our own suppressed possibilities, we multiply the number of lives that we can really know." And this leads us to the two main outcomes of the ethics course in UCD. The first one is narrative creation. So a narrative is pretty much a story which have a chapter, a scene, various different characters, various scripts in it, and so on. And the idea is that unless we know ourselves, we are limited to an egocentric role in our life story and also in our work story as well. And by knowing ourselves, we become free to positively impact our life story and those of others. So some of you will have been on leadership courses, and one of the essences of leadership is to be able to create a story. Most people don't want to create a story. They want to kind of find a role in some story that's out there, and the ability to create a story is a really powerful thing. One of the related kind of issues that we face as a profession is the rise of data analytics. I was talking to the actuarial partner in one of the big four firms here in Ireland about what they have in mind for that. And what they were pretty much saying is that it doesn't make commercial sense to hire actuaries as kind of the programmers. They're too expensive. But what they need is someone who can create the story, and then for the programmers to fit in to that story. And what they had in mind was that if they are to kind of expand their actuarial practice to have a data analytics bit, it would probably have a few actuaries who would be mainly involved in creating the story, and then programmers working for them. So this skill is larger than just ethics, but it's also key in, I guess, the ultimate reason why we could do something along these lines, and that is resolving ethical dilemmas. I guess the role of an actuary, one of the hardest bits is that if something unethical arises, and an actuary can often be damned if they do and damned if they don't. If you whistleblow, that causes lots of issues for you. If you don't whistleblow, you could be also struck off for not speaking up enough. So the main reason for this ethics education is to empower the actuary to be able to handle those situations in a way that is more useful for them, and also in a way where they can serve the public interest more. So what I'm going to do is look at a very simple example. So this is an example which would be done with the first years. There would be kind of exam questions which would be harder than this, but I get to think it kind of explains the ideas very well. So the example exam question would be, you are a senior valuations actuary working in a large life insurance organization. The company has recently put out the tender to get quotations for a new valuation system for its actuarial department. There are two significant responses to the tender. In your opinion, one of the bidders is considerably preferable to the other one. However, despite your recommendation and your view that that one is the one that is what will work, the opposite decision has been made, and it now looks likely that the other valuation system will be purchased. So you consider that it is probably due to the CEO of the insurance company being friends with the CEO of the company likely to win the contract. So as you can imagine, if you're in this scenario, it's quite a head-wrecking place to be. And what you're asked is to outline what you should consider before making a decision on what course of action you would likely pursue. The idea here is kind of like what Einstein said. He said, like, if you have a very important thing happening and you have an hour to decide your answer and your life depends on it, most people, he said, will consider the question for a short period of time and then mostly try to work out their answer. He would spend most of the time considering the question, and that's what we're going to look at here. So there's no one specific way to deal with what's happening here, but a good approach would involve application of thought, proportionality, and judgment. One of the key things that you'd need to do from this approach is to know yourself. And the first question you should ask yourself is, how strong are you? Are you strong enough to take action on this issue? So being able to see a number of courses of action, a number of alternatives, is a sign of strength of mind. Seeing alternatives is often referred to as having broad shoulders. So there's a wide range of courses of action here, everything from staying silent to whistleblowing or resigning at the other end. And if you think that I can only see one course of action, you need to know that you need to consider more options. You also need to consider the nothing in excess strategy. So if I said to you white, in most of your minds the word black will come along as well. So the idea is that if you think I should do X, if Y, which is the opposite, also pops into your mind, it means you need to kind of expand your set more before your action. You also need to work out what is the story. And what's crucially important as well is, will it have a good ending or a bad ending? And the actuary should check that any strategy that they develop is what's called a winning strategy. I must say I don't like the term winning strategy anymore since Trump has started to use it. And this is a term used by the psychologist Eric Berne. he says if you're going to do something which is going to win, you're rarely going to talk about what you do if you'll win, but you know what you'll do if you fail. And a losing strategy is one where you talk about what you'll do if you win and you don't know what you'll do if you lose. So if you're talking about, I'm going to get him, blah, 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 I'm going to show him, blah, 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 you've lost. And you need to know that the story you create in your mind is important. You could say it's important to confront the issue, but confronting it and failing is not a valuable exercise. So if you become a martyr for no good end, it's not really very useful. The power of your strategy will depend on the thought that you put into it, and the power rests in the narrative, not in the analysis. As part of that, what you saw in the video is also important, where you can discuss internally, introspection-wise, your inner brute, your inner conformist, your inner egoist, and try to kind of be able to be clear in your mind what you want to do. You also need to consider character. So you might want to informally investigate, is there other examples of nepotism or cronyism in the organization, or is it a one-off? Did you want to assess the proportionality of the issue? Is there any other taboos happening that wouldn't be a good thing? You also want to consider at least two alternative options. One you might consider to be the prudent option, which is kind of the safe option for yourself. And also what might be considered the superiorly prudent option. Adam Smith describes this as having the best head and the best heart. So it's the right thing. Usually this involves a degree of risk. So having some kind of courage would be essential. How can the actuary be prudent in this scenario? Well, they need to consult any professional guidance notes, ethical standards expected of the actuary. They need to think back over their own work and consider if they've made any mistakes themselves. The actuary must also be careful about anything they've written down. They might want to also informally assess the viewpoints and perspective of others in the organization in a cautious way. And they need to kind of carefully consider what Adam Smith calls the impartial spectator, especially if what happens might become legal. One thing you might not have come across before is like, what can an actuary do to aid having more courage? So this is actually, it's about a 2-hour class that we give, but some very brief comments would be, an actuary needs to have a good, long, honest conversation with themselves. So to see if is there other motivations which are distorting their viewpoint. Usually being able to have a good chat with someone you can trust is useful as well as sounding board, and also having a good walk is also very important. Other thoughts and actions, you might want to consider putting together a well thought out question, asking whether any conversation has happened between the two CEOs, and also possibly setting out your concerns in writing in a well thought out manner. If you're going to whistleblow, which probably wouldn't be the case here, you want to be discussing whistleblowing regulations and also to what extent you think those regulations would protect you. Other considerations too as well, we take the approach that life is kind of analogous to a hill, that the hard decision is usually the right one, and the easy decision is one you'll regret afterwards. And then the idea is to try to wish that you were stronger rather than wishing that this situation was easier. There's other tools and techniques you can use, like the use of laughter is important. They say in Sun Tzu's The Art of War, they say if you have a tyrant and you cut off the head of the tyrant, some other tyrant will come along. But if you can laugh at them, you have a chance to win. There's also the idea of persuasion. So the old-fashioned view of persuasion was something that you do with yourself rather than with others. Aeschylus famously said, "Yes, I love persuasion. She watched my words. She met their wild refusals." And there's also other reasonable comments that could be made. So this is something that I could probably go on with for hours, but this is probably giving you kind of a flavor for the type of education and the type of course that the students have. So I guess I was saying at the start of the webinar that it can present some opportunities for us. I think the business model here is very simple. It's what we've been doing for hundreds of years, which is that trust is good from an ethical perspective, but it's also a very valuable commercial quality as well. Also, it's very hard not to watch the news at the moment, seeing what's happening in the US and all over Europe as well. The world is crying out for trust, and I think we're in a unique position to be able to deliver that in a way that is good for us and good for everybody else as well. So what I think would be very useful for us is enhancing our ethics education in a way that improves public trust in actuaries. My dream, my vision of what I'm trying to achieve in UCD and hopefully in a broader way through too, is to potentially create what I would call a framework for trust. What it would involve would be quite simply actuaries completing a course in character formation, the testing of character, and a quality assurance process where remedial actions are taken as required. And the idea would be that this would create a verifiable trust. It's not saying you can definitively trust it in the same way that, like, if you're a young actuary and you're asked to check a spreadsheet with 1 million numbers in it, you don't literally have to check everything. You apply a certain number of checking processes, which will probably find 90% of the errors. They might find all of them, but the process that you do to check something means that the soundness of it will improve. And in a similar way, this kind of framework for trust should be able to create some kind of verifiable trust. One of the other big issues of our time is data ethics. So do you trust organizations with your data? I know friends of mine who work in organizations, and they tell me things that are quite scary about what happens to our data. I think there is a big role here for actuaries if we can credibly demonstrate trust. I also think that, I've definitely noticed in the last year that our ability to attract talent and our susceptibility to lose talent to data analytics is growing. But your typical actuary, I think, that comes along, they mostly want to do the right thing, and having an ethics component in what we do, I think, would improve the attractiveness of our profession. I think other industries also need actuaries, although most of them don't even know what an actuary is. And I think they need them for the same reason why insurance and pensions need actuaries. If you're an organization, and even if you're a plumber, you can charge a higher price if the customer is willing to trust what you do. And having a framework for trust, I think, would be a very valuable commodity, and it's a win-win ethical outcome. Why actuaries? Well, we actually have a quantitative tool for assessing character. This is a website which will be launching on June 29th for the EAA Data Science and Data Ethics event. It's a tool that enables quantification of someone's character, basically to say that you're likely to be a brute, you're likely to be a conformist, you're likely to be an egoist, or you're likely to be more than that. And it also enables education to improve your character. But, and I'm going to be fairly open here now, maybe possibly oversharing. Why am I focusing on education actuaries rather than in a broader way? Well, about 10 years ago, I did a training course on teaching students with Asperger's. And I must say, I thought it was amazingly good. I learned so much from it. I was very excited by it. We all got the slides afterwards. I sent the slides on to so many people. I think I sent it on to about 10 actuaries. But each of the 10 actuaries pretty much got back to me with nearly the same response. Something like, oh no, I think I've got Asperger's, smiley face. And I don't think any of them did have Asperger's, but what they effectively, I think, had was the positive traits which were mentioned in the course, which is an honesty and directness, a reliability and loyalty, a strong dedication and determination, a strong moral code, a sense of right and wrong, a strong desire for knowledge, truth, perfection, a distinct sense of humor, which I think is great, and an exceptional long-term memory. The main weakness that was mentioned was, you know, a risk aversion from, you know, finding uncertainty to be harder to handle. But one of the aims of the course that I've just mentioned is to help students manage that more. But from my own personal viewpoint, I think that gold almost that's there with actuaries is fantastic. It's just from a human viewpoint, it's really good. And that's also the reason why I think actuaries have this potential to go beyond what they do at the moment. So in summary, I think we are very, very lucky and very privileged to have such a strong ethical tradition in the actuarial profession. I'd see actuary as two things: one, being very strong analytically, and also having a very strong ethics. I think that enhancing ethics in our education system by adding instruction on character formation to the AAE syllabus could be something that we should discuss. Ideally speaking, get many more views. Just having one view, I don't think is strong enough. I think this would empower actuaries. I think even at a minimum, it will improve presentation skills, self-confidence, all that kind of stuff as well. But it has the ability to create this framework for trust, which I think we're in a relatively unique place to achieve. And I also think that it helps broaden actuarial work, which is something I'm very passionate about. I'd like to see wider opportunities for my students. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'd welcome any comments. And if you have any comments or questions after the event that could come along to you, feel free to send me an email. So I'm going to hand back over to Henning.
Yes, thank you very much, Colm. I do have a couple of questions, but as said in the beginning, perhaps let's collect them and have them covered at the end in a joint Q&A session. Sure. And of course, I'd like to motivate everyone present to post questions through the chat so that we can cover those in the last part of the webinar. Which would then directly lead me to the second part, Raphael's presentation on CPD. There's perhaps not a very direct or obvious link between the topics, but if you give it some thought, I think there are many things that Colm spoke about regarding the initial education of actuaries. Those things more or less come back in lifelong learning, especially when you have to concentrate on new topics, new environmental aspects of actuarial work, where it's quite important to have the, let me say, right compass to cover those topics. So I'm very happy to hand over to Raphael, who'll talk about the AAE CPD strategy. And I guess you'll perhaps have already heard a bit about it, but I'm very happy that Raphael can give you a deep insight into the new strategy. He was chairing the AAE CPD strategy task force, so I'm very happy to have him on board and talk a bit about the outcome of the task force's work.
Okay, thank you very much, Henning, and good morning to everybody. Thank you, Henning, Colm, Suzanne, and Monique for organizing and making this webinar possible. I am taking the control of the screen while I'm talking, and I hope everything is okay. Okay, I hope you can see the first slide of the presentation. And I wanted to say thank you to Colm for the interesting presentation. And I agree with Henning referring to the connections between the two topics in the webinar today, because not only for the issues that Henning was referring to, but also thinking about importance of trust and public interest. These concepts are directly linked also with CPD, and not only for consumers. So it's not only a question of protecting consumers, but to other kind of citizens. So I find clear interactions between the two topics in the webinar today. So I hope you all of you are listening to me properly, and I will go directly to the presentation. The AAE review CPD review task force was working through the 2019 year and the first term of this year, and we presented the final report in the virtual meetings we had at the beginning of April, and then the report was accepted by the board. So now we have some conclusions, some relevant, in my opinion, relevant conclusions for the AAE CPD strategy to be further developed for the next future. And the aim of this presentation is review or summarize what were the main findings we got and what are the main conclusions that we have. So let me check if I don't know if it's working. Let me check. Now, okay. This is mainly the structure of the index of the report. First, we have we will make a short introduction, and then we will go for the aims of the CPD, of a CPD scheme, then the principles for every CPD scheme, what are the approaches that we identified for possible recommendations to further develop the CPD strategy, and what are our conclusions, making an outline for a possible recommendation. Okay, the goal of the AAE CPD Review Task Force was to review the current AAE CPD strategy and formulate proposals for further development of that strategy. This is a need that was perceived, and we had this goal. Okay, there you can see the members. We had members from different associations in Europe, different parts of Europe. What about the aims? Okay, this is when we arrive to the conclusions, we will go back to the role of the aims of and especially the principles. But considering the aims, okay, education and professional standards. So I'm referring to the code of conduct and the standards of practice are the pillars for recognition of actuaries as competent professionals in the areas in which they practice. But education can be divided into two parts. We have the first one corresponding to the basic education to become qualified. I'm referring to the core syllabus. And the second one corresponds to the further development to maintain and further develop skills and knowledge at an appropriate level. So it requires continuing learning because the skills and knowledge required by actuaries are likely to change over time and is also impacted by changes to a specific actuary's role or job. Okay, and also the expansion of the profession into new areas involves or means that actuaries need to develop further their knowledge, their technical knowledge, and also the personal and professional skills, opening competencies to these wider fields. And another issue to consider here is reputation and recognition. CPD should ensure that reputation and recognition of the profession is protected and well supported, as actuaries play important roles in the insurance sector, in pensions, in social security, and also in risk management more and more. So to fulfill these roles in the public interest, it is a key issue that actuaries should be seen as competent in the areas in which they practice. And CPD, so CPD is one important way to prevent professional conduct failures, which could be a risk for the recognition of the profession. So the ideas that I have put over the table are more or less summarized in these 3 points that you can see. And these should be the main aims for the CPD. And the conclusion is CPD is a key element to support actuaries' lifelong employability. Let's go for the principles of the CPD. And we have identified 4 big principles of CPD. The first one is the, let's say, the wider one, which is staying fit and proper and being long life employable. So it's a big principle, including different ideas in it. And the idea is that fully qualified actuaries need to professionally develop themselves to stay fit and proper at all times, especially in their practicing area. But we can highlight some ideas included in these principles. Like, for example, an actuary needs to keep up with new actuarial standards of practice and modifications to existing standards. Also, an actuary needs to be aware of developments in national and also in international legislation and accounting standards. As well, in some European countries' jurisdictions, actuaries are recognized as fit and proper for certain functions by the legislation, and this normally means a reservation of activity for the profession. Especially in those cases with a high responsibility in the public interest, CPD is a key element to maintain that legal recognition. Another one is that actuaries who move between countries or work in an international environment need to understand the different regulatory and legislative frameworks in each country, the applicable accounting standards and actuarial standards and practices. Another one is that actuaries may take on a number of different roles over their careers, so they could be changing, including managerial and leadership roles, and personal developments will be necessary to equip them for these new roles. Actuaries need to address skills and knowledge needs to function in new areas of practicing arising from expansion of their profession again, and actuaries need to be regularly challenged to think through ethical and professional questions. So here again, we can see a clear connection with Colm's presentation. So all these issues or ideas can be included in the first principle. And now let's go for the second principle of every CPD scheme. The CPD scheme and the CPD strategy should be evidence-based in order to be able to demonstrate its application and to be monitored. Yes, CPD, not only it should be something, a clear criteria in the CPD scheme, but also something that we need to put into practice, that the CPD should be evidence-based. So it should ensure that the system in place is credible, is efficient with regards to costs and benefits of getting the evidence. So we need to be practical, identifying what kind of evidences we need to keep. And the third consideration is that the CPD scheme should avoid discrimination to actuaries which may need to demonstrate their CPD to another member association or to the supervisor of a different country. The next principle is assessment. CPD needs to be assessed in an appropriate way. And we should consider both content and format needs. So individual actuaries are responsible for the content of their own CPD program or plan. However, a member association should encourage actuaries to actively discuss their CPD with peers and other actuaries. And member associations will need to be able to check evidence of CPD. So again, documentation to be able to check evidences when it is required, and also should make regular checks that the CPD requirements have been followed, at least on random basis. The responsibility from the association regarding the members' CPD ends with that checking. This is an important point to keep in mind. And then let's go for what we identify that as the flexibility and proportionality principle. So it includes two ideas. So the first one is that the CPD scheme needs to be flexible in a range of features. For example, the coverage period. Some associations identify the year, but some others might identify 2 or 3 years in order to be able to balance the CPD activities during this longer period. And also the acknowledgement of self-learning or or setting limitations for soft skills CPD activities. So there are many items in which the CPD scheme should be as more flexible as possible. And then the CPD requirement needs to be proportional in terms of every national market and every member association's resources. So it does not introduce disproportionate disruption for actuaries complying with it, and also for the member association in implementing the CPD system. What are the 4 approaches that we identify to design a CPD scheme? Okay, we identified 4 possibilities. The first one is, let's say, the modern one, which is the implementation of outcome-based schemes. The second one is CPD schemes in which the member association define a frame with a minimum education number of hours. The third one is a combination of, it's a system which combines an outcome-based, or some features from the outcome-based schemes and some features from the schemes which works with the minimum number of education hours. And then the fourth one, the fourth approach is to keep the situation as we have, in which every association has its own CPD scheme or strategy, more or less consistent with the AAE, with the current AAE strategy, and we have some important differences between different associations. Okay, the first one is the approach of outcome-based schemes. This is starting to be a reality in Europe because we have a scheme in place in the UK, and we have a pilot in the Netherlands, and it's also a reality in some other associations, as in South Africa. In South Africa, they are running an outcome-based scheme for more than 2 years ago, even more, I think 3 or 4 years ago. So what's the main idea? The main idea is that actuaries work through cycles of professional development. So they themselves determine their development aims, set up and implement their development plan, and after after this period, the actuaries need to analyze and assess the results of their CPD activities. So the main element is not a number of CPD hours, which are no longer prescribed by the member association, but the main element is the results of the CPD activities. Anyway, the process is documented and can be reviewed by the association when necessary. And another key element of the outcome-based schemes is that actuaries can be required to discuss and reflect on their development cycle with a reflection partner, which means a reflection partner. A reflection partner can be a senior actuary, a peer, or can be an employer, or can be a manager, or can be, let's say, a mentor, or a staff from the member association. So we can find a different a range of possibilities. What are the pros and the cons of this approach? The pros is that the outcome-based schemes facilitate that learning is in line with the development needed by each individual. This is clear. There is a documented development plan that can be reviewed, and actuaries need to sign an annual declaration that they have followed the CPD process. So individual responsibility plays an important role. But what are the cons? The cons is that first, the field review of the content of each individual development plans is a time and resource demanding process. So in reality, The only check that the member association can carry out regularly is that the process has been followed. So it's a, let's say, a formal check mainly. And the second con is that it may not be legally appropriate for some associations to document and record the individual development plans. So we can have a legal problem here. However, instead of recording evidences, associations could advise their members that they will be required to produce documentation of their CPD compliance at the time of a CPD review or any investigation into their professional conduct, and that inability to produce such information would be seen as an indication of unprofessional conduct. So, as we could see, the main con is, let's say, checking the documentation. There can be documentation, but checking that documentation and demonstrating the CPD can be a con in that kind of CPD schemes. Let's go now for the schemes in which the member associations define a minimum number of education hours. This is the kind of system that or scheme that most of the member associations in Europe have in place, and so actuaries register the CPD activities with the member association, and it assesses the fulfillment of the requirements. What are the pros of these kind of schemes? The main pro is that there is a hard evidence of CPD. The association can monitor if the actuary is fulfilling the requirements, and it can be shared with the main stakeholders of the member associations. For example, the local regulator of the European regulator, or even the Actuarial Association of Europe. This information will allow to promote the actuarial profession and to identify needs from actuaries and member associations with regards to CPD and find new ways to provide solutions. The implementation of these CPD schemes can be maintained at levels which are acceptable by small member associations, which could find more difficult to implement outcome-based schemes. What are the cons? Okay, the first one and the clearer one is that the clearest one is that it doesn't necessarily guarantee that the education received maintains the actuary fit and proper, because the content or even the format is not necessarily in line with the development needs of a specific actuary. If you need to fulfill a number of hours, no one is guaranteeing that you will be acquiring the needed the competencies that you need, the knowledge or the skills that you need. This approach must be seen to be indicating that to actuaries that once the required number of hours has been achieved, then the CPD requirement has also been achieved. And this is not the aim of the CPD, of course. Then we have a new approach. This is new because until now, or up to now, no association in Europe has a CPD scheme like this one, also, although the UK is moving to it in a practical way. So which is this third approach, or what are the main features of this third approach? So it's a combination of the 1 and 2 approaches. So the actuary makes his or her own development plan, which must be documented and made available for the member association, and is also subject to a minimum number of hours, or maybe, in order to be as much flexible as possible, an interval of expected CPD hours. What are the pros? It facilitates that learning is in line with the development needed by each individual, so it demonstrates that actuaries stay appropriately fit and proper. The fact that there is a minimum number of hours that can be checked means that there is hard evidence on CPD. So the actuary not only has his or her own plan, but also the completion of the number of hours that he or she needs to fulfill. And the third, the majority of the member associations already have hours-based CPD schemes. So there would be no major disruption to implement this approach. Most of the member associations would only need to include the need that the actuary develops his or her own development plan. What are the cons? Okay, hard evidence is still only that a certain number of hours of CPD has been carried out without any assessment of the content of that CPD. Nevertheless, actuary's development plan allows to assess the content of that CPD in the context of that plan. So there is some additional light of the utility of the CPD content. It might be seen that to be indicating to actuaries that CPD requirement has been fulfilled once the required number of hours has been achieved, although this problem may be alleviated by giving an interval of expected CPD hours instead of a strict minimum. Again, flexibility. And then the fourth approach is, let's say, stay as usual. So we run a survey in the task force to identify the main features of the different CPD schemes in Europe, and most of the association have a requirement on education hours. It varies among countries. Just two have outcome-based schemes, and some of the associations don't have specific requirements and rely on individuals' responsibility. And actuaries may or not register their CPD activities with the member association. In some, they have to do it. In some others, they don't have to do it. And the member association is supposed to be assessing in most of the schemes, is supposed to be assessing the fulfillment of the requirement, but there are some others in which, as the associations don't need to register the CPD activities, the member association can't make the assessment. So, okay, it's clear that if we don't want to introduce a disruption, it is the perfect situation, because the situation is proportional to the resources of every association. And okay, this is the main pro. Also, that for the countries where there are no specific requirements and rely on individual responsibility, it's difficult to guarantee that actuaries stay fit and proper, although these associations tend to be very small and social control usually takes place. And what about the cons? Okay, it doesn't guarantee that CPD is appropriately assessed, and pose the question whether the actuaries in associations where there are no formal requirements remain fit and proper. So this uncertainty is not good for the profession, of course. Without having evidence, then it is challenging to prove profession's credibility to external stakeholders. And it is a matter of credibility to have some common requirements like signing off an annual declaration or setting a minimum of hours of CPD of hours of CPD. There is a mistake there. So what are the conclusions? of our in our report. Okay, the first one is that CPD's principles must constitute the basic pillars of any CPD scheme. Second one is that the documentation, so evidence, is a key element to allow audit and assessment of its completion. So we need to be very careful with this principle, with the principles relating to evidences, to documentation. And what are the approaches? Okay, we can, in order to be very flexible, keeping the flexibility principle, approaches number 1, 2, and 3 would be acceptable in the context of the new AAE CPD strategy, especially considering that differences between different member associations can be motivated by several reasons and are not necessarily bad. Some of the reasons can be the number of members, also the jurisdiction in every country. There could be many reasons for that differences. But again, approaches 1, 2, and 3 would be acceptable in order to move further in order to go to a scenario in which we have a common consensus to develop the profession forward. And what would be our recommendation? Because approaches 1, 2, and 3 would be acceptable, but which one is our recommendation? Okay, we recommend, at the end of our report, we recommend approach number 3 as a best way to move forward, as a good practice, we could say. In fact, approach 1 and approach 2 are subsets of this approach. In approach 1, the requirement of the number of hours would be 0, and in approach 2, there would be no need to document a CPT plan. So, in conclusion, approach number 3 and what, in our opinion, what the AAE should require to all member associations is to have a CPD scheme which places the following requirement on individual actuaries. First one, that the actuary has considered his or her own development needs. So it comes to preparing the plan, to making the plan. Second one, that the actuary has engaged in appropriate activities to bridge identified competence gaps. Then the third one is that the actuary has documented plans and activities as specified by the member association. And in the end, that the actuary has spent at least specified by the member association, of course, minimum number of hours on CPD activities, or alternatively, be able to motivate why the minimum number of hours has not been appropriate given the circumstances of the individual. So, for example, there can be a maternity leave, or there can be any other situation in which the actuary can motivate why he or she hasn't fulfilled the number of hours, which is not prescribed maybe in a strict way, but recommended. So I think this is all from the report of the AAE CPD task force. And we think, going back to the beginning, we think that that CPD is a key element for the profession, for every actuary, and for the profession to move forward, and is related with basic education, is related with the other pillars of the profession. So I will be very happy to attend any of the questions that you want to make me in this in the end of this webinar. And now I will hand the control again to Henning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rafael. I think that was very interesting to see what the task force came up with. So I would like to motivate everyone again to raise any questions through the chat. We have received some, and if that's okay for you, which I hope it is, then we'll just put them on the screen. Give me a second, please. So first of all, we have a question for Colm. Colm, do you see a need for ethical education to be updated from time to time? So similar to, for example, CPD requirements with regard to professionalism questions, to technical questions, of course. Do you see a need for updating ethical things, even though you were speaking about the formation of an actuary? Do you think it's also a need within CPD?
I think that's a very good question. So if you had an academic in a very lofty tower, they could say, oh, you don't need any new stuff, you just read the classics and you're fine. But that's a little bit unfair and maybe unrealistic. I think there is so much wisdom out there, but I think it needs to be communicated in a relevant way to the students. And like, I think it's our responsibility to be able to kind of encourage them to make the education as good as we can. And that means we do have to kind of update it over time so that it's more relevant. I'm not sure that's the exact updating that they want me to discuss, so happy to elaborate if they want to kind of clarify as well.
Well, from my understanding, that would be the answer to the question, but perhaps if there needs to be additional clarification, I would ask through the chat for that. A second question came to Rafael. I hope you can see it as well. Rafael, updating actuarial knowledge in the area an actuary is currently practiced should be more in-depth than updating actuaries in diverse areas. Is this two-depth level CPD considered realistic and appropriate to implement?
Okay, thank you for the question. It's a very interesting question. We haven't discussed on that in the CPD task force, but even I would say there could be more than two depth level in the CPD scheme, because it depends on the reason why the actuaries feel the need to make CPD activities, because okay, and even in the stage in which the actuary is developing, I mean, the level could be different. If the actuary is moving to a managerial role or is moving to a different area, I mean, a different business. So what I don't see is if you identify certain or a range or interval of hours, of CPD hours, this should be different. This is something that I don't consider that could be appropriate. But why not different levels of depth level in the meaning of different consideration of the content. I don't know if the question is referring to this, but for me, it's completely appropriate to identify different levels in the content, but not in the requirement of the number of hours or in the design or in the features that the plan needs to have.
Yeah. I would support that, and I think you have made the point in the CPD strategy about reflection and identifying by yourself where's a need for additional information and additional knowledge. And so I would always see a distinction to say, where do I see a need? And if I only work on a very technical aspect in one area, of course, it needs to be more in-depth for myself. But if you're working in management or similar roles, I think it's clear that there's a different approach to it rather than a pure technical one.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Good. Then I have a third question. It should be on the screen as well. It's again to Raphael. What is the way forward regarding the implementation of the CPD strategy?
Okay, good question. I think this is a question which is more directed to maybe the board of the AAE and not to me. But as far as I know, okay, or as far as I can understand, the review of the AAE CPT strategy must be done, and they are waiting to when I say they, I refer to the board. They are waiting for some additional issues to be considered, as for example, the possibility to include CPD in the MRA, in the Mutual Recognition Agreement. This is something that is going to be discussed, and this is a very important item, of course. So developing a new AAE CPD strategy and then asking to the member associations of the AAE to introduce the new developments from the AAE CPD strategy will take some more time. But I think that the basic principles are something that we all can share, because they are very reasonable. I mean, it's completely reasonable that we need to continue learning and to do it, trying to achieve certain aims, and doing it respecting some clear principles, and we need to have a plan to reflect ourselves what we need for further develop themselves as competent professionals, and then to fulfill the certain requirement on the minimum number of hours. So this is something that we in Europe, we need to try to introduce in our way of thinking when we think on CPD. But the way that the AAE will move forward to introduce the changes in the CPD strategy is something that will not take a long period of time, because the idea is to do it in a short period, but I don't know exactly when and where will it happen. Maybe Henning will know more about this than me.
Well, thanks, Rafael. I don't know the exact timeline, but it is as you mentioned. And if you recall that in the first step, the CPD task force did a survey throughout the member associations about their CPD strategies on a national level, I think there's a straight way forward to say the associations see the need to have an organized way of handling CPD and have clear CPD requirements established. So linking it to not only the initial qualification that needs to be there, but saying actuaries need to stay fit and proper and not aiming at the Solvency II term, but rather saying professionals need to be in a position to do their job professionally, that it's clear that knowledge and skills need to be up to date. And so I'm absolutely in line with what you're saying, Rafael, that this needs to be promoted and needs to be implemented into the thinking and the understanding of the actuarial profession. So that's clear for me. But coming back to your question, I do not know the exact timeline, even though I would hope it's not a too long one. Okay, everyone. I have not received any additional questions. So if you have one, please use the chat. That does not seem to be the case. Colin, Rafael, any additions from your side? Anything you would like to raise on the things we have seen and we have discussed afterwards?
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly fine.
Yeah. Just on the question I was asked as well. In the video that you saw, Owen lifted up a book at the end, which was Alcibiades I by Plato. So you could probably say that reading that, which is about justice versus expediency, would mean that you can do all this ethical things, but in practice, you need to know a lot more than just what's in a book. So I do think it's important that we not only update things, but we also make them relevant and make them practical as well.
Okay, thanks. Rafael, anything to add from your side?
No, nothing from my side.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thanks to the two of you. Hope we'll be in a situation to meet face to face again, even though I really like the webinar format to talk about certain topics, especially this one. Thank you very much to all of you who participated. Again, if something comes up, please contact us with questions, with remarks, with proposals for additional topics from an educational point of view. Thank you very much again. Take care, enjoy summertime, and hopefully see and meet as many of you as possible in the future. So take care, all the best, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.